We left off last video with a successful network call where we got our array of follower objects. So we're good to go there. Before we move on, like I said, we're going to talk about kind of refactoring all the strings in the network manager and then, refactoring into the result type. So we're going to do those steps before we move on to like creating the collection view and all that stuff. So let's look at the network manager again. Like look at these strings. Just not good looking, right? We want to make this a lot neater. So we're going to refactor this into an enum and work with that. Before we do that though, I want to address a quick bug that was discovered. If you go into custom views, go into GF button. I made the mistake here, just complete oversight on this title label.text color. It should be set title color. We'll talk about that. I knew that. It's just, I don't know, this like title label.text color reads right, where this bug actually got me though was that like the default color for the title on these custom buttons is white. So it was an easy oversight. And again, I want to leave this stuff in here to see how easy some stuff can be to kind of miss. So the proper way to do this is set title color white, it can be whatever you want, dot for control state dot normal. That's how you properly set a button title color. And actually, like I mentioned before, the default color is white. So you don't even really need this line of code. Like in theory, like that's how you can do it because we're going for white. However, because I know a lot of you out there may be like coming back to this project and reusing code, I want to leave this line of code. I want to leave that line of code in there. So you know that if you want to change your title color, you just need to change this color. So I wanted to address that real quick before moving on. But back to the network manager. Look at all these strings. Now, some of you out there may be familiar with the concept of error.localizeDescription. So you may be wondering, like, why are we even writing our own strings, right? The error comes with a string that tells you what happened. You're right, it does. Why we're not doing that is it's a product decision. And let me actually print out an error.localizeDescription to actually have that up in visual. That way you can see what I'm talking about. So down here on line 46, we're letting our followers, right? We're trying to decode the data into our array of followers, right? We just talked about that last video. What happens if this fails, like if our decoder can't do it, it's going to throw an error. It's going to go into this catch block and return this string. Well, instead of this string here, actually, let's come in, just comment that out. Instead of that string, let's do completed, pass in nil, and then we're going to pass in error. Make sure it's the non-optional one, because the optional one is this guy. We don't want that one. So error.localized description. So the next thing we need to do is mess up our decoder, right? Break your code on purpose? What are we doing? So in order to mess up our decoder here, you go to the follower object, right? Because remember I said these variable names had to be exactly or, converted from snake case. So let's just mess this up, just make it so it's not going to match, right? Throw a bunch of gibberish in there. Now let's run our app. The app's going to run fine. But when we try to decode that list of followers, it's going to say, hey, like I can't decode this. You're going to get an error. And then we're going to print out the error.localizeDescription, and you're going to see what that prints out, and then we'll continue our discussion. So here we are, enter username, SALLEN0400, hit get followers, and we get an error. But now you see we passed in the error.localizeDescription. And this is a minor detail, but I think it's important. See how it says bad stuff happened. The data couldn't be read because it's missing. Okay, that's actually a human readable error message. Sometimes they're not all human readable, but typically the error.localizeDescription, at least in my opinion, is meant for the developers, right? A lot of times you'll do print statements with the localized description so you can see what's going on. This is a very good developer error message, right? As a developer, you can say like, okay, the data is missing. Cool, I get it. But imagine being a user and you thought the app was working, you type this in, and it says the data couldn't be read because it's missing. Like they're going to think like, wait, my data is missing? Like what happened? The whole point is that like the developer errors that you may get from error.localizeDescription may not be, I'm not even going to say may, most likely aren't the errors that you want to surface to the user, especially because like a lot of times you want to be very like friendly and gentle with your error messages because, right, like something went wrong with your app for the user. So you want to take that opportunity to kind of like make them feel at ease and not get frustrated with your app. So again, very, very often you don't want to pass the error.localizeDescription because you want to have good error messages for the user. Error.localizeDescription, great for developers. Maybe not so much for users. So back to the code. So that is why I choose to write my own error messages. So let's go back down here. Let's get rid of this line and go back to where we were. And then let's talk about refactoring out these not so good looking strings. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an enum with an associated value of a string. And that's what we're going to convert this to. So in the GH followers, create a new group. We're going to create a new folder because other stuff is going to go in this. Remember during the organization video how I said that we're going to kind of be building our folder structure as we go. That's what we're doing here. Utilities, that's going to have some stuff in it. So new file, and there's going to be a Swift file called error message. Hit create. And again, enum error message. And again, it has an associated value of a string because that's what we want to do here. Wait. Got to jump in real quick. This is editing, Sean, by the way. I noticed I was misspeaking during this section when I talk about the associated value of the enum. I keep calling it associated value, but really it's the raw value, and there's a minor difference. So I'm taking this opportunity to give a little bonus lesson real quick. So pulling up the documentation on enums, you see you have associated values. And if you look down here with the enum, so what I just talked about, we're declaring a type after the enum right here. Where associated values, you declare the type after each case, like you see here, like the UPC is an int, the QR code is a string. So you can determine different types after each case. That's the associated value. I kept saying that, but again, I misspoke. What I meant was, if I scroll down here, I meant to say it's the raw value, which is kind of like a twist on the associated value. Whereas like I talk about here, you define the type up here after the enum, and then all your cases conform to that one type. So again, raw value, all the cases conform to one type. Associated value, back up here, each case can have a different type. So minor difference, and again, I just misspoke. My apologies. I will make sure to annotate it every time I say associated value when I really meant raw value. My bad. Let's get back to the video. And so now we need the cases of our error messages. Don't worry about this error message just yet. So the way I find my cases, right, is I go back and look at what my error messages are. So the first one, this username created an invalid request. Please try again. So I'm going to name this one invalid username. So go back to the error message. The first case we're going to have is case invalid username. And that is going to equal a string of that. And I just go right down the list here. The next one is unable to complete your request. Please check your internet connection. So I'm going to name this unable to complete. And you're going to see here in a second how we actually use this. Unable to complete. And we're going to tab these over because, we got to line these up. All right, what's the next one here? Network manager. And we're going to talk about the pros, why you would want to do this as well. So the next one, invalid response from the server. Please try again. So I'll say invalid response for this error message. Case valid response. And that is that. So the next case is the data received from the server was invalid. Here's one good reason why. Now see that this is the same error message. Cool. Now we're only going to have to, kind of have this abstracted away once. So the next one is case invalid data. Command V. There we go. Let's clean this up a little bit. Back to our network manager. So now we can replace all these strings with this enum. But the first thing we need to do, if you remember in our get followers function here, remember we're returning two things, our array of followers or an error message, which is a string. Well, instead of passing the string, we're going to pass in the error message type that we just created, right? No? Yes, error message. That is an optional. Real quick, since I just said that's an optional, remember I said we're going to be refactoring into the result type in the next video. I'm kind of showing this thing like in stages of evolution. And the reason being is because, the result type just came out in Swift 5. So you may go into a code base that hasn't fully adopted the Swift result type. So you may be seeing it done this old way. Like I guess this is the old way to do it prior to the result type. So I want you to at least see this and see how it was done. In the next video, you can see kind of like the new way. That way you're exposed to both of them. So it's a little sneak peek at videos to come, but let's get back to this. So now we're returning a type of error message. So you can see, cannot convert value of type string to expected type error message. I'll finish the message for you. So basically what this is saying is like, hey, this is a string. I'm expecting an error message. Like what are you doing to me, Sean? That's what Xcode's saying to me. So now this is our username is invalid. So now instead of passing that string, we can pass in dot invalid username. So I'll do a command B so we get all our autocomplete there. And that's another benefit. As you see, you got the autocomplete. So this is the unable to complete request. So now this is going to be unable to complete. There we go. And this is the invalid response from the server. So dot invalid response that we had there. And now this is invalid data, which we have, dot invalid data. And then, like I said, the reusability, right? Now I just reuse dot invalid data. And it's great. You can see you get the autocomplete. But another good reason, well, one, it just looks way neater, right? You had all those strings now. Now look how neat it looks. So one is just the cleanliness and readability of code, all right? Because you don't have to read out a whole long string. You just know you're passing in the invalid username error type, the unable to complete error type. But another perk to this is if you go back to error message, like all your error messages are in the same spot. And here's like here's a concrete example of like why this is important, because as developers, you know, we tend to not think about error messages very much, right? When you're coding, like you don't worry about that. You're like, whatever, let me just throw in a quick error message real quick. And what happens is very often those real quick error messages end up sticking. And then you start like beta testing with your users and you find out your error messages suck, basically, right? They're not very descriptive. They don't help the user out. They're just not good. So oftentimes you'll hand off those error messages to like a copywriter or somebody else that's better with words than you are. And so it's great when they come up with all these error messages, instead of you going all throughout your code, right? Because this is one network call. Imagine a code base with 10 network calls, and there's also error messages all throughout the code base. Now you're just tracking all these down, changing them. Well, when you do something like this, you have all your error messages neat in one spot, right? So it's very, very easy to change them as you go. So that is definitely a big perk of this method. So how to actually make this work here now, if we go back to network manager, I'm sorry, not network manager, follower list VC, where we're actually calling our network call, right? Remember this is returning followers, or now we get back an error message. Well, now the error message we're using here, right? We were passing in a string when this was a string, but if I do a command B, like it shouldn't let us do this. Yeah, I can't do this because now this is of type error message. This isn't of type string, right? Where message is expecting a string. Well, we can access the string in the enum if I go back to error message, right? So this is the enum, or I'm sorry, this is the error message. The thing that's of type error message is invalid username. However, invalid username has something called a raw value. And that raw value is the associated type, which is this string, right? So it just happens to be a string, right? It could be an int, and the raw value that we set could be a 5, right? It doesn't have to be a string, but that's just what it is. So again, invalid username is of type error message, but it has a raw value that's of type string. So that's what we need to access here in the follower list VC, error message dot raw value, and that will give us the proper error message, the string we need. So let's just run this real quick to test that. And then we'll talk about leading into the result type here in a second too. So just type in a bad username, get followers, invalid response from the server, please try again. So we successfully refactored our strings out there. And again, back to the network manager, just looks a lot nicer, a lot cleaner code, easier to read. Now I want to reiterate talking about the result type just to really drive this point home. What result type fixes is, you see how you're either getting a follower back or an error message, and they're both optional, right? Because you never know, like, are we going to get one or the other? So result type fixes this kind of ambiguity, right? Because the result type, you're just going to get back a success or a failure. It really simplifies things. But again, just to reiterate, the result type is brand new in Swift 5, so it hasn't been out very long. So many code bases that you may be trying to get a job and going into may not have fully adapted the result type yet. So I want you to see this way. Next video, we're going to talk about the result type. And after that video, you'll be writing the modern Swift way to do it. So on to the next one.